Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for taking time out of their busy Saturday morning. I think it looks beautiful. I haven't gone outside myself, but it looks gorgeous outside. So I know it's an extra sacrifice on a beautiful morning like this to be here, but we think it's important. And so thank you for that. And thank you to our legislators also for giving time up on their Saturday morning on such a beautiful day. My name is Ashley Fick. I am your moderator today. I am the Civic Engagement Librarian for the Johnson County Library. If you have any technical type questions, you can direct those over to Amanda Wallemeyer. She is happy to help you if you have problems with sound or anything like that. A couple of housekeeping issues. We have live captioning today. So if that is something that you need, that is offered today. We're going to give 4 minutes for each legislator to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their district, and then we'll get into your audience questions. You can submit those. There's a link over in the chat. Those can go into, you'll just submit them via a form. 1 question per submission, please. You can submit as many questions as you want, but it's easier for us to pick out the questions if you submit 1 at a time. And with that, nobody wants to hear from me anymore, so let's get started. Which legislator wants to speak first? What do you want to?
I can go first. While Astra's being quiet, I think that's usually a good. I'm Representative Xu. This is Astra. My wife is a saint during the week, and so the weekend she's all mine, so I can help get my wife a little bit of sleep. I'm the state representative from House District 25. My district boundaries are 47th Street to 67th Street, north to south, and then State Line Road to about Lamar Avenue in Mission. It kind of juts a little bit in there. And it's been a session. Everything kind of started hot and heavy because to a large extent, we had to repass a lot of stuff that passed last year, but didn't ultimately get signed. And so it kind of feels like we're finally getting at the point where we can breathe a little bit, but we still have quite a few big bills that yet to have to be debated. So I'm the ranking Democrat on financial institutions and rural development on the House side. And I am very, very excited because we have the opportunity, I think, to do something that's pretty rare in Kansas, and that's to be first at something. One of my frustrations repeatedly is the being 48th in the country to something, being 49th in the country to something, and a piece of legislation was brought to us where we would quite literally be the first state in the country to this, which obviously comes with its uncertainties, certainly. I'll start off and say it's called Technology-Enabled Financial Fiduciary Institutions, TEFI for short. The more often I hear TEFI, the more I kind of get the idea of like a dinosaur logo in my head, TEFI, the friendly dinosaur. But it generally is exciting. It's kind of like a high volume transaction trust bank. And, you know, I reached out to Commerce, they like it. I reached out to the state treasurer, he liked it. I can't find a reason to hate it. And again, if you Google that phrase, you're not going to find anything because it's the first of its kind. And as I was doing my analysis of the legislation, you know, there's essentially no downside for Kansans. They make their money off of essentially bringing in money from high net worth individuals on the coast, like 5 million plus, and they'll host that money essentially here in Kansas. So, and so we will continue with that, and I'll keep you guys updated as that goes along. Excuse me as I transition here. So there's a lot of legislation coming down the pipeline. The big ones are we're going to need to do a tax bill at some point, whether it's the Senate's much larger SB 22 bill, the House just passed SB 50 bill that's a little bit smaller. Both of them are kind of similar in concept. They have lots of provisions that we like personally, such as decoupling and allowing people to itemize, raising the standard deduction, but also coupled with a lot of stuff that we don't like, such as big tax cuts for corporations that don't need it. And so that will likely be taken up at some point. There is also a large education voucher bill coming at some point, we know. I am optimistic. It might pass the chambers. I am fairly optimistic that they would not be able to override the governor's veto on it. We only need 3 Republicans on the House side to side with us in order to sustain the veto. So I'm fairly optimistic on that one. And then just one thing that I want to touch on before my time is over with is I'm sure many of you have seen the story in the Kansas City Star about Russell, Kansas, and an incident that I had. And I just wanted to briefly touch on, just kind of a piece of legislation that I've been working on for several years now, and that's creating an Asian American Affairs Commission. We have an African American Affairs Commission. We have a Hispanic Latino Affairs Commission. Both of them advise the governor. I think with the recent violence that we've seen against Asian Americans, it's just about time to kind of have that centralized resource here in the state. So with that, I will go back on mute. I know Astra tends to be fairly popular, but I will spare you her babblings for a little bit more and let one of the other legislators speak.
Hi, I guess I'll go next. I'm Representative Marilyn Poskin, and I represent House District 20. That straddles 435 from approximately 99th Street down to about 132nd boundary of state line and Metcalf. So directly south, about 2 districts from Representative Xu. This is my first year in the Kansas House, so I will be the newbie sandwiched in between the 2 veteran legislators. And one of the things that I hear so much is how different this session is than previous sessions due to the COVID protocols and, again, trying to get through the bills that were not passed last year. But to me, it's all I know. So it is how it's just how this session has been. One of the things that I know that I really miss is interaction with constituents and folks coming to the State House to let us know what their views are on various things. And as a freshman, I am serving on 4 committees this year. I have the pleasure of serving on the Financial Institution and Rural Development Committee with Representative Xu as our ranking member. And I will also echo his sentiments on the TEFI. One of the things that it was described as is creating a new lane in financial institutions. And if you look at your credit card bills where they all come from South Dakota on the back, that's because South Dakota enacted legislation that made it helpful for those types of transactions to be done there. We know that people incorporate quite a bit in Delaware for the same reason. So the background, as I understand it, is that this TEFI industry touches 3 different business transaction areas, and that there is not a state yet that has legislation that addresses all 3 of those areas. So like Representative Xu, I'm waffling between, is this too good to be true? Is it a bunch of good old boys coming to the legislature to get something for their business? Or is it truly an opportunity for Kansas to be first? And like Representative Xu, I would be delighted for Kansas to be first in this. And it doesn't seem like there is a downside or risk because, again, it's not Kansans' money at risk. It provides for quite a bit of money to flow into. It's tied into rural opportunity zones so that these businesses would be based in our rural areas that could really use this cash infusion. And there's a charity component to it as well that would bring some money in immediately. And also it was very exciting, I think, this year to be on this committee because we were able to help after the big weather event in February, some of the small towns address these incredible bills. And apparently it's quite historic. And like I said, again, my first session that we started in financial institutions and rural development, hearing a bill at 8:30 in the morning, and it went through the House, it went through our committee, went through the House, went to the Senate, and went to the governor's desk and was a law by 5:30 that evening or 5 p.m. that evening. So that's exciting to be part of that. I also serve on the House Education Committee, and I will tell you it's been an interesting committee, and I can tell it's very different than our other ones. Oh, I've got 1 minute. And so what we've been doing is fighting some legislation that seems like overstep from what I would consider the legislature's purview and dictating what school districts and what the State Board of Education could do. I serve on transportation and public safety, and I'm really excited about this very last bill that we have been entertaining, and it has to do with the State Board of Indigent Defense Services, and there is a rate of pay for appointed counsel. So this is for people who cannot afford a defense under their constitutional right, and that rate of pay has been very low for a long time, and we are putting out a bill to raise that to be more in line with inflation. I also serve on the Veterans and Military committee, which is very important to me as my father was a colonel in the Air Force. And I'm excited, you know, again, as a freshman, these are baby steps, but legislation that I introduced did come out of committee and it was passed by the House and is currently awaiting action by the Senate. And I will just wrap up to say that I'm very excited to represent House District 20. We've got education bills coming up that are very important and pertinent. I ran on a very strong public education platform, and District 20 is home to the Shawnee Mission South Raiders and the Blue Valley North Mustangs. And thank you.
Good morning. I'm Senator Dinah Sykes, and I represent the 21st District, which is all of the city of Lenexa and Northwest Overland Park. So 71st to 91st west of Metcalf. I also have the wonderful privilege of being the Democratic leader in the Kansas Senate. So this is a new role to me. I am filling the shoes of Senator Anthony Hensley, who did not win re-election, and he was in this position for over 20 years. So we are doing, my office is all learning new. We had someone who just was a legend and served in the legislature for 44 years. So lots of new things going on in the Senate, and honored to serve in that position. I also am ranking on Senate education, and I think like Representative Xu and Poskin, this has been a crazy session. It has been unlike any of the ones that I have served so far. So my 5th year in the legislature. And I will just be completely honest, the attack on public education this year is seriously overwhelming. We are looking at vouchers, tax credits, taking away authority from our state board of education, who are elected to make those decisions. So, you know, we are not staying in our lane. This is the first year that I have been that our budget does not include education funding. We're either trying to pass the ball and saying we can use federal dollars to fund our schools, which is not allowed because of maintenance of effort, because of those federal restrictions. And also the way that we do our funding formula, even if you could use those dollars, it's not the same. So our schools would not be receiving what they are accustomed to for their budgets. And I think if this is how we end the session, we will be right back in court, because the Supreme Court has held that if we are not fully funding schools. So I think we're headed back to court unless something drastically changes in the next couple of weeks. Trying to think, we also have been attacking rights of women and the decision to make decisions for their own body. A bill attacking transgender students. We have 5 students in the entire state of Kansas who have requested to be able to play on sports teams. And we spent several hours debating this in the Kansas Senate. This last week, even just talking about tensions, and it's a very different legislature than we've had the last 4 years. Because there is a faction of the Republican Party that is more conservative and far right than anything that we've seen in the years, and they are emboldened. And the bills that they are bringing and pushing, taking away voter rights, not allowing businesses to require certain vaccinations. It's really all kind of they're pushing it through COVID, but it is not COVID specific. So where different places may require vaccines to keep their communities safe, their employees safe, it's really just an all-out attack on trying to it's just hard to explain. I had people come into my office after this bill passed the Senate Health and Public Committee on Friday, and they're like, is this bill going anywhere? And I said, well, normally I would say no, but right now, you know, it is possible. So I will stop and answer your questions. And it seems 4 minutes goes really fast.
I always do that. I always start talking while I'm muted. We'll have 3 minutes for each legislator to answer each question coming from you. If you came in late, the link to submit your questions is posted in the chat. So please submit those. We want to ask all of your questions, as many as we can. Also, just to note, I forgot to mention, we do invite every single legislator to these legislative copies, every legislator with constituents in Johnson County. So I want to make sure that that was clear. So let's get to the first question.
Ashley, you're muted again.
Spacebar never works as well as I want it to work. Okay, with the census data release being delayed, what kind of impact will that have on the legislative process with respect to redistricting? What will the timeline with respect to the committee hearings, map drawing, and the Kansas Supreme Court review? Also, we have another redistricting question. What can you tell us about the newly created redistricting advisory group?
I can start. I mean, normally we've already started these hearings, and the House has a committee. I don't think they have met at all. The Senate has not even selected our committee. So we don't know who's going to be on that. But normally at this point, we were looking at those census numbers and starting to make those plans. So this is shifting everything. And I mean, we look back to 10 years ago when, I mean, it was the final deadline to get these approved. And I think we're going to be looking at that again. I actually have a bill that would kind of take the politics out of this and put it with a commission that could draw those maps, and nonpartisan commission. I don't see that going anywhere. In the question about the advisory committee, this is something that we have always done. I'm part of the LCC, and we vote on that. And these are people who are looking at the different software and things and kind of putting in rules. It's nothing new. It is a standard, and we've done it in years past. But I would say just, we know this is going to be a hot topic. And when we do start going out and engaging the public, I would just say, encourage everyone to get involved, because you don't want legislators drawing the map and picking their voters. We want this to be a fair election, a fair process. So stay tuned, because just like I said earlier, this has been a crazy session already with the politics and emboldened, and I think you will see this even more so with redistricting. Part of the, I think, positive is there are those factions and people in the Republican Party that do not like each other, so they're going to be trying to draw each other out in their attempts to redistrict. So that actually gives Democrats some allies to work with people. So I think you will see, different groups coming together to draw these maps, which will kind of help the process.
I think one of the nuts and bolts things about the census getting delayed is that it's going to make it really, really difficult to recruit candidates for the House. The Senate's every 4 years, right? And so 2022 is not relevant to them yet, but for the House, we're all up in 2022. And so if we don't get our maps until March or April of the year, that makes it really, really hard to find candidates. It's hard for especially us and Democrats and in the rural areas to find candidates in a normal year, in a good year, in a quote unquote wave year like 2018 or 2020. So now with a shortened timeline, it's going to make it pretty tough. And so we're reaching out, we're finding people are reaching out to us. But without knowing exactly what the districts are, it's hard to just say, all right, you're this person here, you're this person here. It's just kind of like everybody's in a group together, and then we kind of have to figure it out later, which is not the ideal scenario.
Well, going last on that question is fabulous, because as a freshman, I haven't gotten very much information about redistricting yet, but it was a big part of the discussion when I ran for office in 2020. We saw former Senate President Susan Wagle actually say on videotape that they needed to elect Republicans so that they could draw out, for instance, Congresswoman Sharice Davids and gain control. And what is, we have elections every 2 years, as Representative Xu said in the House, but if they draw this map, it stands for 10 years. And so if they have complete control of how that is going to play out, that is a very long-term effect on the state of Kansas. I will also mention that I am in the very, very southern tip, like just 3 blocks to the end of my district. So I'll be watching this very carefully as well.
Okay. Do you think that Governor Kelly might veto some of the more conservative legislation? And if so, are there enough moderate Republicans that the veto would stand?
I think it's going to depend on the issue. I think education, we probably we can sustain vetoes on that, if not in the Senate, definitely in the House. And I think on bad tax policy, if the Senate's version of that tax cut bill is the one that goes into law, I'm pretty sure that we can sustain a veto on that. It's really on an issue to issue basis. But depending on the bill, I think you do have people who sustain the veto.
Well, I can tell you that in our House Education Committee, we have not had agreement on those bills that pushed our legislative purview into the State Board of Education. There was a lot of pushback in committee on most of those bills. So I agree with Senator Sykes that we might have the best chance of that on bad education bills. I will say, they used to talk about Kansas having a 3-party system, and this goes back again to what Senator Sykes was saying about the new faction in the Republican Party. It used to be a little bit of Democrats, moderate Republicans, and then traditional Republicans. And we've replaced that 3-party system with a few more Democrats, traditional Republicans, and then a very, very hard right faction of conservative Republicans. And it does seem like they are not interested in following leadership, and that they are emboldened, that they are taking action. So it will be interesting to see if we are able to override some of those vetoes. And I will again say that it's not too early to get involved in your backyard politics. We were so close to breaking the supermajority, so that and my point in that is not that there needs to be more of one party than the other, but when you have when you don't have a supermajority and a superminority, it brings people to the table for compromise. And I was really hoping to see that this session. But one of the things that can be very helpful, particularly, is if you will write to your legislators and let them know which policies and so forth you would like to see the veto on, because when they hear from their constituents, that really does have some movement, as we've seen with Senate Bill 208. The House has less appetite for it, and I'm sure somebody will ask about that later. But that, I believe, is a result of hearing from constituents throughout the state.
Yeah, not much to add to either of those 2 great answers. It really is an issue by issue thing. Education is probably one where we can rely on enough people. There's an interesting dynamic, at least on the House side, where especially when it comes to stuff like constitutional rights, you might once in a while be able to get the Democrats, along with like the super far right, like libertarian types, to sustain a veto potentially. This is stuff like infringing on business rights, even like there are certain bills out there that prevent businesses from requiring vaccines, and there are certain libertarians out there who don't think we should require businesses to ever do anything either way. And so that might be one of the examples where we get kind of one of those weird coalitions. So we're going to do everything we can, obviously, but I think as of right now, I know that the governor knows she can't veto everything bad. And I think the focus is going to be on public education for now.
I do want to add, we talk a lot about the not working very well, but Senate Bill 88, which was Representative Poskin's addressed earlier, where it was allowing people, because of those super high energy or gas bills, to address that. So when push comes to shove, we can come together and look at what is best for Kansans and pass good legislation. It just seems it's not as often as most of us would like.
Is the anti-wind energy bill going anywhere?
So we actually had a discussion in the Senate on a securitization, which actually will open the door to some renewable energy options, letting or like Evergy and things kind of put other things kind of securitize it so they have more money and then be able to use more clean energy, the money to help with clean energy. And there was a long debate on the Senate floor regarding that. And so I think that bill may come to the floor, but based on that conversation on this other bill, I don't think there's the votes to stop wind. And we've been hearing from a lot of advocates. And I mean, it's an economic driver in our state. So why would we shut the door on that? The chair of the Senate Utilities is a climate change denier. And so he's going to push those things, but I actually don't think he has the votes to actually get them passed.
Yeah, and I would guess that, this is one of those scenarios where it's very nice to have two chambers. You hear stories about Nebraska and the unicameral and the benefits of that. Well, this is one of those scenarios where the Senate is, to put it mildly, a tire fire this year. And so the House is, I think, a little bit more reasonable. And I think this is an area where there's very little appetite on the House side. We have many more, kind of economically minded Republicans who know that wind is a benefit to the state. Again, this is one of those things I talk a lot about, ambition for the state. Kansas is either one or two, depending on the metric, in wind energy in the country. And then this is something I think with a little bit more ambition, we can be the first state to go 100% renewable if we wanted to. We can be the first state to sell renewable energy to other states if we wanted to. And so I'm excited to keep this going. And I am optimistic that it would die on the House side, at least.
Well, I would echo what both Senator Sykes and Representative Xu said. And I will tell you that my inbox is full of support for the wind energy business. And I would also point out that there was a lot of, the huge weather event in February. People came out immediately and tried to blame the alternative energy sources. And I would let you know that we received information that not a single wind turbine in Kansas froze, and that that sector of energy performed as expected. So I'm hoping, along with Representative Xu, that we can keep this down in the House.
Senator Sykes, you've made valiant attempts to get Medicaid expansion passed. Is this important issue dead in the water this session?
I will say it is definitely an uphill battle, but it should not be dead, because we are, besides the fact of all the money that we are sending to other states because of our portion that we are paying in federal taxes that are going to other states, we now have an incentive from the federal government, and it would be $460 million to the state of Kansas over the next 2 years if we expand Medicaid. I think so many people are frustrated. They see the crazy that is going on, and they're not as engaged as in the past. But I have always said it was, short-sighted not to expand Medicaid. Right now, I mean, if we use $460 million, I mean, think of the mental health that we could increase access to in our state. School, it is awful that there are so many people who will not have this discussion. We actually did have the first clean vote on this bill since 2017 in the House. It was an amendment to a bill, and actually when we ran it, we weren't sure if it would be germane or not. And it was the first clean vote on Medicaid expansion. And I was really disappointed in some of my colleagues who have been on the Republican side, who have been supporters of Medicaid expansion, that they did not support this vote. The House has carried the weight of getting this up, and I think honestly they are really tired of working really hard and getting something and sending it to the Senate and it dies. And I would just tell everyone, continue to put your pressure on senators. It is hard. I do come to a 21 vote if all of the stars align, and maybe Astra is doing a dance for us to get things passed. But don't give up. Now is the time to do it. It would help in so many ways. And $460 million that we are saying no thank you to.
Yeah, I would absolutely think we need to keep pushing it. My kind of myopic view of how it's going is that even with the additional federal money potentially being dangled in front of us, this is no longer a logical argument, and it has not been a logical argument for many years now. Right now in 2021, the argument is purely, in my opinion, we cannot let the governor get the Medicaid expansion and win before the 2022 election, and that's essentially what's kind of ruling the Medicaid expansion conversation right now. I will say also there's a little bit of shenanigans going on where the bill that the Senate put Medicaid expansion on tried to put Medicaid expansion on as amendment, when it came over the House, they quite literally rewrote the bill slightly to make it not amendable to Medicaid expansion on the House side, right? They don't even want to have the debate. That's Asher telling me she's tired of me talking. And so they're even like literally rewriting bills just to make sure that it can't be amendable to Medicaid expansion. They don't want to have the debate. And so, really the conversation has to be, the best path is we need to reelect more Medicaid expansion supporters in 2022, and we need to reelect the governor. Even Wyoming is passing Medicaid expansion as we speak. It's passed through committee, it's passed through the House. And so again, I'm just tired of being last in the country for the game.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and just say, also hold people accountable who said they supported Medicaid expansion. Senator Baumgardner got the Kansas City Star endorsement, and she said she supported Medicaid expansion. I have never really seen her as a huge supporter, but she is on record. Also, we have new people, Senator O'Shea from Shawnee County. They have been on the record of saying they support Medicaid expansion, but given the opportunity, they either decided not to vote or they voted no.
It's hard to make any more arguments for Medicaid expansion. Rarely is an issue both a moral and economic imperative. House District 20, the healthcare industry is our #2 employer. We've got to keep our rural hospitals open. And again, I don't think it is a matter of logical explanation. The opponents have run out of excuses. There's money available. The governor proposed tying it to legalizing medical cannabis, which would take care of the state's portion of that with the revenue. It is just mind-numbing and cruel and heartless.
Okay. Are there any anticipated changes to early voting or related issues?
So yesterday in Senate, Fed, and State, which that's where all of our election bills have gone this year instead of to the local government, which is where they've normally gone to. Local government is a more sane committee than Fed and State. Actually, we passed a bill in 2017 allowing for if your mail ballot had been postmarked by 7 o'clock on the night of the election and it was received by Friday, so 3 days after, that it would be counted. They have just reversed that decision. You see, I mean, it's a nationwide thing to be voter suppression, and we are seeing that in Kansas. I would say earlier in this session, our Secretary of State was pushing against this because Kansas had a fair election and he did a great job. We looked at how mail ballots were received and all of that. And again, I will say there is a faction in the Republican Party that now are discrediting our Secretary of State, who is one of their own, because he was being sensible and wanting people to be able to vote. And so now they are just disregarding any testimony that he has put, any facts about Kansas. So you will see that. And the other thing, that bill was introduced on Thursday night at like 6 o'clock. It was read in. They had a hearing the next day within 12 hours. There was not enough time for public comment. People did not know the bill existed. They didn't have time to read through the bill or testify. So this is not the first time that we have seen that this session. Republicans will introduce the bill. They will line up the proponents that they want to speak and then rush something through. So then when they're debating this on the floor, they can say there were no opponents or neutral testimony. Well, there wasn't, because we did not allow the public to know that this was happening.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit of color, sorry, she's starting to get cranky. Just to add a little bit of color to Senator Sykes, this bill that they looked at yesterday would have nullified 32,000 votes in the state for no other reason than just when it was received by the election office, right? Like, obviously they try to get it in on time. Everything else happened, right? It's just when it's received. And so it would have nullified 32,000 votes. So.
I would like to add a little to that. We've seen suppression bills all across the nation, and just looking at the ones that have come through the House Election Committee, it's so disheartening. Again, back to the timing on when mail ballots, I know we all remember refreshing the Secretary of State's voter view. Is it in? Is it in? Is it in? Is it in? And they are basically saying that if it doesn't get there by election day, then it won't be counted. It would disenfranchise from the last election over 32,000 voters. And as well, I would point out that Representative Esau was part of the 2017 House that passed that vote, and she was very much in support of it, and is now saying no. And we know that that's based on the big lie. Our Secretary of State has absolutely said that our elections were 100% fair and there was no election fraud and so forth. So how do you change your view on that completely, particularly when the USPS is experiencing very large delays? I sent a piece of mail to Texas February 17th and it has not arrived yet, just via regular mail. So I think that is very frustrating. They also had legislation that would make it a felony, or I believe a felony, to take your little old lady neighbor's ballot to the box for her. I know in this pandemic that we all gathered together to help people who are shut in and so forth to get their ballots to the box. So that would make it a felony to do that. And as well, there was some legislation that would make it a misdemeanor for a candidate to handle a ballot that was not their own. My husband has MS and he's in a wheelchair full time, and he has permanent advance mail ballot. But I take it to the mailbox for him. In November, it could be cold and rainy and he has a wheelchair. So I would be committing a misdemeanor by putting it in the mailbox for him. So we've seen quite a bit of that. And this week in the House, they tried to pass a resolution, HCR 5015, condemning the Voting Act that the US Congress is passing. And we spent, Representative Xu, I think about 4 hours debating that. And I did stand at the well, which is intimidating for a first-year representative. But I basically said, here I am, a white, blonde hair, blue-eyed Leawood mom who's been voting for 38 years, and never once have I questioned my ability to register, that my vote would or would not be counted, and that until every colleague in the House, every citizen in Kansas, and every citizen in the United States has the comfort level that I do, we need to use our voices to stand up against legislation that makes it harder to vote.
I would say this Senate is doing a version of that same resolution condemning HR 1 on Monday.
I would recommend doing what Representative Miller did and just literally going through line by line of the original HR 1 and pointing out all the good things that it does do. That's what much of the 4 hours before procedurally being called tedious, which is not a tool I think that we want to open up all the time in the Kansas House.
I have reached out to former Senator Miller and asked for his information.
Can you tell us about the domestic violence bill?
The domestic violence gun bill, I think, is what's being questioned. So this was one that I introduced on the Senate side that's kind of stalled in committee. Representative Hoy has had a little bit of better luck in the House side, and there was a hearing on Friday, and I don't know that it moved out though, and I don't know if I think it's probably dead for the session unless we can amend it in. And I will say Representative Hoy has done a great job. She actually had the Kansas Rifle Association kind of stand down on this, as well as the Attorney General. For those who don't know what the bill is, in 2017 or 2018, we passed a bill that Kansas law mirrors federal law. So if you have been convicted of domestic violence and you should not be able to have a gun because you were convicted and federal law says you have lost your ability. We passed that in Kansas. This is a trailer bill to that. So we already know you're not supposed to have them, but this is kind of putting in place, how do you relinquish those? Do you surrender them? Can you sell them at a gun shop? So it's really just putting in, how do we make sure, and how do you share to the judge that has issued the order that you should not have guns? How did you relinquish those? So common sense, hopefully we can have this conversation. I think there are some gun bills that are probably going to come on the Senate floor. So always looking for vehicles to have this conversation. But yes, email and call your senators and representatives, because this is not changing anyone's access to guns. It is just saying you have already lost your privilege. Now let's figure out how we make sure that you do not have them.
I would just like to chime in and give a big shout out to my freshman caucus colleague, Representative Hoy. She has done amazing work on this area, and again, had the hearing yesterday, and I don't think they took final action, so that would probably be next week. And I do want to say that it's been very difficult to address any type of gun law. We recently had a House Bill 2058 that initially addressed reciprocity for concealed carry gun licenses from other states. And it was pointed out that as Kansans, we would hope that people who conceal carry in our state would have at least the minimum requirements that we do in Kansas. And that reciprocity would have allowed folks from other states to use their licenses, including people with various felons who are convicted stalkers, a lot of dangerous folks. So again, do please email your representative, and I would suggest carbon copying, CCing Representative Hoy as she takes a lead on this issue.
Yeah, nothing else to add for me other than I am so incredibly impressed and proud of the freshman class and in the Kansas House, including obviously Representative Poskin and Hoy. But there are many others who are more than picking up the slack and learning quickly. And then I'm just thrilled that we have them.
Do you support House Bill 2202, the Death with Dignity Act?
Sorry, I'm pulling it up on my computer right now. As far as I know, this is not something that has gotten a hearing. And then so without getting much more information on what seems like a pretty big topic, I don't want to make a hard answer, but kind of broadly in concept, I think so. I think this is a conversation that's been in the news for decades now, but kind of broadly philosophically, I don't see an issue with it. But obviously, I would need a hearing to know, what the actual benefits and more importantly, what the negatives of such a bill are.
I would have to second that. One of the things that has become so clear to me is that when I was doing advocacy work and I knew every bill number by their number, and when the question came up, I'm like, oh, 2202, which one is that? And had a little moment of panic. That one of the things that we rely on as legislators are the experts who are constituents. And I just really have to give a shout out to House 20 constituents, because they come to me not with just form letters about their issues, but they bring personal experience, they bring expertise in their field to inform me on the issues as it relates to our district. So I haven't received any information about 2202. And it hasn't had a hearing, but we do rely quite a bit on the proponent and opponent testimony in hearings when we look at, making those kinds of decisions. And again, it's a discussion that's been around for years. And as long as there are protections that don't allow it to slide into, getting rid of folks and in bad ways, I do think that death with dignity is a right that humans should have.
I would echo what my colleagues have said. This has been introduced and it always seems to die in committee. I think that's one thing. Some people who are uncomfortable with situations or bills will just kind of put them away and not have the conversation or hearings. And I think that's a disservice to Kansans, because this is important. It has been a bill for the last 5 years. And the fact that some people who are in power and decide what is heard and not heard and don't want to have that discussion, I think that's a disservice to Kansans.
If parents want their kids to attend a school that is different than the local public school, then isn't denying them the funds to attempt that really a regressive tax that affects the economically disadvantaged more? Wealthier parents can afford to pay both the taxes that support public schools and the tuition at their school of choice. Shouldn't we give these vouchers or ESA funds to the middle and working class who can't afford the double payment?
Our Kansas Constitution says that we will fund public schools, not private schools. That is a right that anyone has. But, if I can't afford to go to the country club down and I like that pool better than my community pool, that is a decision. And I do not support taxpayer dollars going to private schools. I was actually a fundraiser development officer for a private school, and they have endowments, they have discretionary funds. There are ways for that. But when a private school institution will not allow everyone to come to their school, I have a problem with taxpayer dollars going to that.
I would echo that. I've mentioned that my husband has MS and is in a wheelchair, and I can't take my Parks and Recs tax that, for facilities that don't meet our needs and go somewhere else and, pay for maybe a trip to Disney or something, who has the pass, to get in line. So I would agree with Senator Sykes, and I did run on that very strongly, that public dollars fund public schools. I've mentioned multiple times that our blended family has 7 children, and that gave us 90 years of K through 12 education experience, and that 62 of them were in Kansas public schools. The other side of that is that 20 of those years were at private schools. So I understand that parents would make different decisions at different times. And for what it's worth, at the time that I made the first decision for my first child to attend a private school, I was actually a single mom on food stamps, and the tuition was more than I could even begin to handle. And I will tell you that I told my son at the time, I said, you make that private school want you as much as you want to go there. And they did come up with the funding to make that happen when my kids were on free and reduced lunches in the public schools. And I was a single mom on food stamps. And I then spent quite a bit of time doing fundraising for those private schools. And I believe that's how it should work. And the Constitution, again, states that we will fund public schools. It's a shared responsibility amongst all Kansans, and it's not divisible in that way, in my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with all of them. I think everybody up here welcomes private schools and charter schools as part of the ecosystem, but there's no reason that I see that public funds need to go towards them. I have a school here in my district just down the street from me that literally bans gay people from attending. And so I would never support public funds going towards that. If a private school wants to, if all private schools want to open up to everybody and accept every student that a public school does and provides all the services that a public school does, and and does everything a public school does, we can have that conversation. But at that point, they're just a public school, right? And then so there's no reason that the public funds need to go towards schools that can pick and choose who attends.
Representative Poskin, your email updates are very informative. How has your first term measured up to your expectations of serving?
Well, thank you very much. I spend way too much time on those, and people tell me that I shouldn't be so worried about them, but I do enjoy them. And I do hope that it is conveying some of not only the district-wide information and very valuable legislative information, but maybe gives you a little insight into my personal experience in the legislature. And I will say that it is an incredible honor to be there every day. You walk through the halls and you just get this sense of history and what it is that you are doing to further the interests of Kansans. So again, everybody has said it's a very different experience. And I always use this analogy, which I don't know because I've never been the parent of twins, but I assume when you have twins and people say, wow, that's so different and so hard, that it's all you know. So that's all I know about how a legislative session goes. I'm both inspired and frustrated with the session because some days we do amazing work and other days I'm just stunned at the lack of ability to look at long-term and consider all Kansans in decision-making. And I am working on my newsletter right now that will go out a little bit later. And if anybody would be interested in signing up for it, they can just go to my website, poskin4ks.com, and there's a little link to sign up for it there. Thank you for that question and comment.
Can you explain Senate Bill 40 and the reasons for strong support?
I think the reasons for strong support is this was a compromise between Republicans, Democrats, and the governor's office. This was the extension of the Kansas Emergency Management Act. I'm going to be honest, I don't love the bill. There are lots of things that I do not like. The number one, taking away authority from our governor, current and in future. But everyone was at the table. This was the compromise that we were able to come to. Elections have consequences, and we did not have Republican support to make this any easier. So at the end of the day, it's a compromise bill, and it would have only gotten worse.
I can't express how much better the bill, this is a common theme, how much better this bill is than what came out of the Senate. The one that came out of the Senate was incredibly damaging for a lot of reasons. Yeah, I agree. There are parts that I don't like and parts that I think that are quite literally like unworkable. There's an grievance process in there for especially local school boards that I think is really onerous. It's like if any one parent is aggrieved, they can file a complaint and they have to have a hearing on it. I don't know how that one's going to work in reality. But at the end of the day, it's something that was necessary to happen, right? Not having an extension of the Emergency Management Act was not on the table, that it had to get done. And this is the best version that we thought could get done. I think we saw a very similar thing with the Emergency Management Act with HB 2016 last year, is that I didn't love it. There were liability immunity provisions in there that I hated, quite honestly, but the governor's team needed it and the state needed it to keep moving forward. If this did not pass, then I quite literally don't know what have happened with vaccine distribution, right? Like that's the one thing that had to continue to happen. And so, even though it's not wonderful, it is at least workable and allows us to keep vaccines distributing, which is important to all of us.
And I would add that the characterization of strong support for SB 40 might be incorrect wording because we had a lot of votes for it, but that doesn't mean that we liked what was in it. And I would refer back to what we've talking about in the change of the composition of the legislature. And oftentimes as a caucus, we are taking a stand and voting against things with our 38 in the House, 38 votes to say, no, we don't want this. And there's been some discussion about why we didn't do that if we don't love the bill. And that other faction, if there are a faction, the various practically libertarian groups who don't want there to be an emergency at all, emergency declaration. They don't want a single dollar from the federal government coming in to help us get our economy back on track, to help our schools, be open as best they can, to continue moving forward through this pandemic. So if we had taken a stand as a caucus and voted no on this, they would have had enough votes to join with us and therefore stop the emergency declaration and stop what we needed to have. So I wouldn't necessarily say that a yes vote was enthusiastic endorsement of the bill, but the alternative could have been very devastating for the state of Kansas.
Yeah, I would just say, sorry, I know I keep going back, but there is a group of people that think we could legislate COVID-19 away, and that is not the truth. And they don't believe that there is an issue. They don't believe that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and they want the declaration to end. But we would have jeopardized our federal dollars. Our National Guard is being paid by those federal dollars. They're helping us do testing, vaccination, food distribution. So even though none of us love this bill, it was the compromise in order for us to continue helping Kansans through a pandemic.
My representative and senator do not acknowledge or answer my emails. I fear they don't pay attention to my pleas to support or deny some legislation. Does reaching out to other legislators from other districts have any impact?
I don't want to say no, but I will say that I put a lot more effort into emails for my constituents than everyone else. Sometimes people email all 165 of us, and it's pretty easy to kind of skim it and move on. But every single email that I get from my own constituent, I answer and I put a lot of thought into. I will say, if they are like this, that seems like a pretty good candidate to think about running, because like being a representative is literally like the base part of the job, right? Like they can disagree with you politically, but it's their job to email with you, to answer your phone calls. And if they're not doing that, they're shirking, in my opinion, the most important part of the job. So that's not something that I stand for. And then, think about it.
Well, I would like to say that early on, when I became much more involved in advocating in the Kansas legislature for things, I was given a piece of advice, probably by Senator Sykes and various other folks, that when you do email your legislator on an issue that they do not agree with or acknowledge, you should pick somebody who does agree with your position and at least CC that person. I do think that the emails that go to all 165 legislators are a little easy to ignore. But if you see that there are two or four people on an email, your own representative and senator, and then perhaps a representative and senator who is working on that bill, what it does is it tells that your own representative that somebody else knows that you've written them. So when they say, I don't hear anything from people on House Bill 2058 except don't put any restrictions on guns in the state of Kansas, there is some backup to the fact that no, they have. And I would say that would be helpful. But the ones that go to all 165 in our form letters, not as much.
I would echo what they're saying. I also, being in leadership, I get a lot more emails. So it's a lot harder for me to get all of those emails back out like I did prior to added responsibility. It's not, and I still have them to email back, But also, I think if it's an issue, if it's in a committee and your representative or senator is not in that committee, yes, copy them in on that, but talk to the committee, because that committee is a representation of the entire state, and they absolutely should be hearing from you on those issues. And a lot of times I think form letters, it is harder to get responses back on those sometimes, especially, but continue to reach out, call, email. And I think, like Representative Xu said, if they're not responding at all, work with a candidate that you believe in who will represent or at least respond to you.
We are out of time, and as always, we have more questions than time. I will follow up with an email to everyone that registered with the contact information for the legislators that participated today, in case you do want to follow up on a question that didn't get asked or something we discussed. It will also provide information about how to find who your legislator is, or the contact information for any other Kansas legislator. And then as a reminder, we did invite every legislator with constituents in Johnson County. And just one last thank you to everyone. Thank you to our legislators for participating, and thank you for attending. We think it's a really important thing, and we appreciate your time as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.